Hey guys, welcome back to my tech channel. So, recently, both of my little brothers have been wanting a new PC. One of them, the one that lives with my dad, is like 8 or 9. Currently has a Dell Optiplex, from what it sounds like. Very old, very out of date, low frames. Plays on Xbox most of the time. My other brother, which is the one that lives with me, also has an Xbox and no PC right now. Now, when I build a parts list for somebody, usually the two main questions I ask are, what's the budget, and what do you plan on doing with the PC? And if one of those things is gaming, I would also ask what kind of performance they're expecting. And since both of them don't have a high-end gaming monitor, in fact, I'm pretty sure neither one of them even have a 1080p panel, gaming performance is not going to be as big of a deal. And as far as budget, well, my brother that lives with me said about $500 to $600, and my other brother just said as cheap as you can get, basically, because of course he's not going to be paying for it, our dad will. So, through my vast research and current PC knowledge, this is what I came up with. Now, I technically already made this video, but I ended up rambling a lot, and I was trying to make the list on camera, and so it ended up being like a 45-minute long video. That's why I'm remaking it. Now, if you can't tell just by this list, I cut a lot of corners. Like, at this point, it's pretty much a sphere of parts list. There's like no corners saved, except maybe one or two. I'll explain. For CPU, 10100F, so no integrated graphics. And as you can see, there is a graphics card with this build, because in my opinion, a good gaming PC needs at least a graphics card. Now, they don't absolutely need one. You can run off integrated graphics as long as your CPU has it. But even the best integrated graphics today can't even come close to a dedicated graphics card, even if it's a mobile, low-spec one from 7 years ago. I have a video on my channel to prove that, if you want to check that out. Since I was able to fit the 6500 XT in this build for $230, which is most of our budget, I had to really slim back, like I said, on a lot of these other parts. Starting with the CPU, we have a 10100F, so a quad-core, but with hyper-threading. So you can't overclock this chip, but it still has a decent 4 clocks, 3.6 base, 4.3 boost. And I don't think a quad core with hyperthreading is the minimum you would need today, so that's why I picked that. And for $84, I think it's a pretty good deal. For motherboard, an Asus Prime B560M Micro ATX socket 1200, of course. Now there are a few cheaper boards, however, since I'm going with only 8 gigs of RAM, I decided to find a motherboard that had 4 DIMM slots instead of only 2, and this Micro ATX board was the cheapest one. And specifically, I went B560 because the H510 and 410 chipset that this is compatible with does not support overclocking of the RAM, which means the RAM would only running at 2666. Not enough performance, I think. So this one will allow some RAM overclocking. Just basic outputs here, nothing spectacular. It does not have Wi-Fi, which I like to have, but both of them have Ethernet capabilities, so that's not as big of an issue. For memory, we've got 2 4GB sticks of Patriot Viper at 3200 MHz speed, casting C16. Actually, a pretty good deal. I was going to go for somewhere around 3,000, but the 3200 kits were basically the same price, maybe a few dollars more. So I thought, why not get the extra speed? I only got 8 gigs because really kind of cut back again on the budget, so 8 gigs now, but they can always add another kit in to this motherboard to get 16 gigs total. Again, which is why I went with this motherboard that has the 4 DIMM slots. For storage, I originally wanted to go with a 500 gig, just plain SATA SSD for the main drive and games. However, getting a smaller SSD for Windows and a couple of programs and a larger hard drive actually was cheaper by about $5 to $10. And I have heard there is some benefit to keeping your games on a separate drive than your main drive, so I think that's worth it, especially because you're getting an extra 128 gigs, technically, in total for the system. Actually, this SSD is the cheapest one that has a DRAM cache, because that's very important. But it took a while to find this one. And a Seagate Barracuda drive, I've used the Seagate Barracuda hard drive before, and for a little over 20 bucks for 500 gigs, game drive is, I think, pretty good. As you know, it's 6500 XT. People say this is not a great value card and not good in general, but it's a low spec card, and for this build, I think it works out. Again, just for a basic 1080p, 60 frames, like max. I think it's going to be fine. And again, it's going to give way more performance than any integrated graphics currently available. Since this is a micro ATX motherboard, we could afford to get a micro ATX case, because usually I would let the person that I'm building the parts list for pick the case, because the case is a lot of user preference. However, I kind of looked at what was available and what I would choose, and this case actually was like a no-brainer. $50, Cooler Master Master Box Q300L. Has a lot of modern features. It has a mesh front panel. I think it's like tempered acrylic, but it looks like tempered glass, so it's nice and clear. Now you see there is no power supply shroud, so it's an open chassis, and I think there's only one fan pre-installed, but as you can see from these parts installed, it's nothing going to be running too hot, and I think the one fan should be fine. Cooler Master, good brand. There's some solid reviews on the case, and for $50, it's one of the cheaper cases you can get that is from a good brand. And as far as power supply, trying to go cheap, but reliable, of course. Power supply is the heart of the system. Anything other than some of the top brands are going to be risking a fire at the most, and all your parts at the very least. So Corsair CV450 watt 80 plus bronze is about as cheap as you can go. So it has the one motherboard, 24 pin, one 8-pin EPS, one PCI Express connector, one SATA connector, one Molex connector. Pretty basic stuff. And since this card only needs one PCI Express cable, and this motherboard only needs one EPS connector, it's all we need, because 450 watts should be plenty for this CPU and GPU combination. Now, of course, I would spend a little more to get something that has a higher wattage, better efficiency, and even at least semi-modular. Personally, this does have black cables, thankfully, but that's just me. For a grand total of $602.28, so right above the budget of around $600. But again, you're getting an actual GPU in the build, which these days is pretty hard to find, as we all know. Getting a somewhat recent Intel chip, a modern motherboard, pretty good RAM, solid storage configuration, good looking case, and a pretty decent power supply. So with the information I was given, and with what I know, this is the parts test I made. Again, a lot of corners were cut. I personally don't think I would get these parts myself for a cheap build. I would personally save up more for better parts. Also, I personally would also go with AMD, because I use my system for other things than just gaming. And since they were only going to go game on the system, at least currently, I thought an Intel chip, simple quad core, would be just fine for their needs. And then with a micro ATX board, there's still some expandability here that they could add if they wanted for, maybe a capture card or whatever. There's even some upgradability with the graphics card to an extent, of course, by the power supply. They can add more storage if they need. Again, they can also add more RAM. They can upgrade the CPU. So there's still upgrade options with this build. This is just the absolute bare bones of what they would need for today. Maybe you guys also wanted to look for a similar build with this price point, and you kind of want an idea of what to get. So that's my recommendation. But that's it for this video. I hope you guys found it helpful and enjoyable. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later.